Hi all you boys, girls, and kids of indeterminate gender. This is the Children's Fun Fact Science Corner, and you can call me the Professor. Today we're going to be talking about books. Now I know a lot of you like reading. But did you ever wonder, who was it that invented books? Now, a long time ago, 6,000 years ago, in fact, when people first started writing, they would scratch what they wanted to say on a clay tablet. That was pretty hard to do, and you couldn't write very many words on it, so people mostly used them for just writing receipts. If you've ever been to the store with your parents, you probably know what a receipt is. When you buy something at the store, they hand you a little piece of paper that says, "You bought this for so many dollars." That's the basic function of a receipt. Now, back 6,000 years ago, here's how it would have worked without the handy printers to print out those receipts. "Excuse me, my good man, have you finished that laundry I asked you to do?" "Yeah, miss, I got it for you right here." "Oh, wonderful, my good sir. How much do I owe you?" "For this much laundry? I'd say you owe me about 3 sheep. 3 sheep? Now that's just outrageous." "Man, try to be reasonable. Underwear hasn't been invented yet." "I suppose that's fair enough. Fine. Take my sheep." Great. I'll write up a receipt for you." Soon, people wanted to use writing for more complicated things than just receipts. When you're talking about more than just laundry and sheep, you're going to need more space to write on. Around this period is when the Egyptians started developing papyrus. Papyrus is basically a weed that grows in swamps and next to the Nile River. They plucked the plant, smashed it up, and turned it into an early form of paper. With all that new space they gained by writing on papyrus sheets instead of on tiny clay tablets, the Egyptians developed a new kind of writing based on pictures. It wasn't always perfect, though. As soon as you finished filling up the sheet you were working with, if you wanted to keep going, you had to stitch a new piece of papyrus to the old one. So they could put the papyrus away, they came up with the idea of rolling it up. This became a compact way to store the things they had written. This new way of storing what they had written was called scrolls, and it was the popular way of writing for thousands of years. Can you imagine writing an entire chapter book on one piece of paper? Some scrolls ended up getting really long.
While papyrus may have been plentiful near the Nile in Egypt, it was harder to find in Europe. Not to mention, when you roll and unroll papyrus over and over, it tends to fall apart. The Greeks developed a new material to write on called parchment. Parchment is animal skin that has been stretched and dried. It could be made from sheep, goats, cows, or even, in this case, from squirrel skin.
Now, a few centuries after the Greeks started writing on parchment, the Romans developed the idea of collation. That is, stacking a bunch of smaller pages on top of each other in a specific order instead of trying to connect them into one long scroll. This new method of storage is called the codex, and it's the same method we use today, page after page instead of one long sheet. Though the codex had now been invented, people were still writing all of their books by hand. If you had just written a new book, say Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, and you wanted to send it to your friend, you'd have to copy out every word with a quill in your hand. Once upon a time. It took a long, long time to copy out an entire book. And there were people whose job it was just to copy things. This severely limited the number of books that were available. So, around the year 1500, a man named Johannes Gutenberg brought an amazing invention to Europe. The printing press was a complete game changer that allowed someone to make hundreds of copies of the same book using the same movable type.
Movable type refers to small metal letters that were used like stamps. They could be arranged to make any word or series of words that you needed. People called typesetters would lay out these letters in order to replicate the page of a book. Once you had all your text arranged, you were ready for the printing press. The printing press was a complicated machine, but here's the basic idea. First, you would ink the type. Then you would place a piece of paper on top of your inked type. Then you would use something flat to press the paper into the ink underneath. You could then remove the paper and repeat as many times as you needed.
Using a printing press, people could make hundreds of copies of the same page in just a few hours. When they repeated the process for every page in a book, that meant that they could make hundreds of copies of the same book that were all essentially identical. The limiting factor became the material that they were printing on, which was, at the time, still parchment. If they were making hundreds of books, that means they had to kill hundreds or even thousands of sheep, cows, or goats. So, they invented a new material to write on and to print on. They called it paper. Today, paper is made from the pulp of trees, but back when it was first invented, it was made of cotton. The same material that you find in cotton balls when you go to the doctor's office, or even in your clothing. Cotton paper was very strong because it was essentially a kind of cloth. They switched to tree pulp, however, because that was a much cheaper option. That's why paper today is a lot weaker than it was a few hundred years ago. Well, boys, girls, and kids of indeterminate gender, we've done it! We started with papyrus in ancient Egypt, and we've ended with the modern codex on paper. Hopefully this helps you appreciate a little more about the books you check out at the library or buy in the store. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Children's Fun Fact Science Corner. I'm the professor, and I want to hear from all of you something that you learned from this. I hope something surprised you or interested you about the history of the book.